Today I wanted to look at a bit of rockabilly, and I'm not a rockabilly specialist by any stretch of the imagination. I don't even own a Gretsch guitar, for God's sake, but it is a style that I really enjoy playing. It's such a fun style to play, and it's something that I do like exploring. So I was thinking about what rockabilly track I should look at, and the first thing that sprang to mind was that I should look at some more Cliff Gallup. Now, I have looked at a couple of Cliff Gallup tracks previously on this channel. I've looked at Bebop-A-Lula and Race with the Devil. The track that I'm going to look at today, Crazy Legs, is another Cliff Gallup classic. It's got a couple of absolutely killer guitar solos, and I think if you learn this track, then you'll be well on your way to becoming a decent rockabilly guitar player. Now, my main focus in this video is going to be on the first guitar solo, which I think is just perfectly formed, but I am going to discuss the other stuff as well, so the intro riff, the second solo, and some of the stuff that's going on in the verses. But let me begin by playing that first guitar solo. For those of you who don't know about Cliff Gallup, he was Gene Vincent's guitar player in the 1950s, and really I think he wrote the book on rockabilly guitar. You listen to those early Gene Vincent records, full of great rock and roll, rockabilly language and vocabulary, lots of blazing solos, and clearly he was a very technically adept player, particularly for the times, but also there's a great rawness to his playing as well. He was a hugely influential player, particularly on the next generation of guitarists. Jeff Beck famously is a huge fan, and he's recorded an album in tribute to Gallup, but also people like Clapton and George Harrison, of course, who played the same black Gretsch Duojet in the early days of the Beatles. But anyway, let's get down to business and take a look at how this track is played. Just before we get into all the juicy details of how this one is played, just want to talk briefly about the form and the chords, and also a little bit about the theory, what Cliff Gallup might be thinking when he's playing a track like this, when he's coming up with these kind of parts. So the form to start with, we're in the key of A, and for the most part it's a 12-bar blues in A. So it's 1, 4, 5 chords. So the 1 chord is going to be A or an A7, the 4 chord is D or D7, 5 chord is E or E7, and I say mostly 12-bar blues. But if you listen closely, you've got two verses, you've got a pair of verses, then a solo, then I think another pair of verses and a solo, but each verse is slightly different. And in fact, the first verse is 16 bars long. It's not quite the expected 12-bar blues, so listen out for that. It's still based on those 1, 4, 5 chords, but the changes happen in slightly different places. And then the second verse is a straightforward 12-bar blues, and then both solos are played over 12-bar blues chord changes. Now what Cliff Gallup is doing, he's not in fact playing any chords, but he's outlining these chords using scale or chord tone ideas, and he's got these kind of spidery, quite intricate lines just happening throughout the entire track, and they're there in the verses as well. They're mixed down a bit lower, and then somebody pushes up the fader in the solo, and you can really hear what he's doing during the solo section. So what might he be thinking here? I think one way you could think about his note choice is in terms of scales. So it's all played in and around the 5th position on the guitar, and you could just think of your old friend, the A minor pentatonic scale, and your other good friend, the A major pentatonic scale, and a lot of his lines can be seen in terms of those two scale choices. But perhaps better might be to think in terms of chord tones and playing out of chord shapes, and this is something that I speak about a lot on this channel, and I'm a big believer in outlining chord changes using chord tones, so knowing your arpeggios, knowing your triads, and it seems to me that that's probably how Cliff Gallup is thinking when he's playing over a track like this. So over the 1 chord he's thinking out of an A chord shape, and then over the 4 chord he's thinking out of a D7 or a D9 shape, and then same thing over the 5 chord, it's an E7 or an E9 shape. So you might like to start thinking about this stuff when you're learning this track, and I try hard not to be the kind of teacher who just shouts out tab and fret numbers. I really want you to understand what's going on in something like this. Then not only do you get to play a great classic rockabilly track, but you also understand what's going on, so you can make some of these ideas your own. So you might like to start thinking about your 1 chord. You've got this A bar chord shape, and within that we've got our chord tones obviously, and we've got our triad shape, so root, third, fifth, and then other triad groupings as well. So a lot of the Cliff Gallup stuff is just playing straight out of that. But it sounds a little bit more rockabilly if you embellish that basic triad shape and those chord tones with some extra colourful notes. So a favourite of Cliff Gallup seems to be the sixth. So you've got root, third, fifth. There's the sixth. That's a lick that recurs a lot in this track. And you've also got your flat 7 here as well. You might like to review my recent video on dominant 7th arpeggios. That's a very useful way of thinking about a track like this, and you've got all of the chord tones then under your fingers. So an A dominant 7th arpeggio. So root, third, fifth, flat 7, and then the same thing in the next octave. You can include the 6th as well. You might even like to include the 9th. So and you've got the flat 3rd there as well. So lots of choices, but all really just based out of that one chord, A bar chord grip. Then over the 4 chord, you might like to think about a D7 or a D9 chord shape. Once again, you've got your chord tones there under your fingers. You've got a D7th arpeggio, or you can play a D9th arpeggio, is quite nice. So that's just root, third, fifth, flat 7. There's the 9th there as well. And then the same kind of thing works over the 5 chord, over the E7. So you've got your E7 arpeggio, you've got those chord tones right there under your fingers. So that's the kind of stuff I would urge you to think about when you're tackling this tune, when you're playing rockabilly, or really when you're playing any kind of music, any style of music. Chord tones are going to be important. You've got that chord tone framework, and then you can embellish that as you see fit with the particular stylistic things of whichever style you happen to be playing. So if you're playing rockabilly, then as I said, you're going to throw in that 6th and the flat 7. You might have some chromatic stuff in there as well. Let's take a look at that intro riff then. So we've got 3 pickup notes to start with. So all in the 5th position here. So E, F sharp, A, and then we've got this double stop here. It's an F sharp and a C, and it's that classic rockabilly dissonant double stop sound. This is kind of the rockabilly sound in 2 notes, I think. And just playing that a few times, then coming down to this double stop at the 5th fret on the top 2 strings. A couple more single notes, more double stops. Then we've got a little bend here. This is very characteristic of Cliff Gallup. So this is an F sharp just bent up to a G, so it's a half step bend, which is the 6th going up to the flat 7. So that's the 6th, that's the flat 7. So just bending that note and releasing it. A couple more single notes, and then we're into this idea. And this is all just chord tones here. So thinking out of this A bar chord shape, you've got your A triad here. We're just sliding in to the C sharp and the E just with the first 2 fingers. And then we're playing the root note with the 3rd finger. So that's the intro riff, coming in on the and of 3 with those pickup notes. So 1 and 2 and 3. Let's move on to the first solo then, and that starts with exactly the same lick. Played, I think, in exactly the same way. Then we've got this lick. Real classic bit of rockabilly language, this, mostly played using double stops on the top two strings. So again, starting with this dissonant double stop shape, F sharp and C. Then the rest of the notes are double stops just played at the same fret. So we're coming down to the 5th fret on the top two strings, and then the 7th fret, and then we've got this little slide up and down from 7 to 8 and then back to 7. And then the 5th fret, over onto the 7th fret on the B and G, and then back to the 5th fret. And then we just repeat that. Slightly different ending on the repeat. I'm just playing an F sharp and an E as single notes. Next phrase. So all of this coming straight out of our A chord shape. It's mostly A chord tones here, so double stop. So again, we've got that bend at the 7th fret on the B. Descending. Here we're targeting the 3rd here, we're encircling it, so that's the 3rd of our A chord. We're playing 1 fret above, 1 fret below, and then we're hitting our target note, which is the 3rd. Then coming down onto the D and A strings. Then we've got this great lick, probably my favourite lick in the solo. So here we're playing over the 5 chord going down to the 4 chord, and we've got, that's played over the 5 chord there, so we're bending again the F sharp up to the G, and it's got that kind of bluesy sound. We're going up to the flat 3rd in relation to the E root note of this chord. So that kind of sound. And then over the 4 chord, once again we've got this half step bending idea. This time we're bending the note at the 4th fret on the 3rd string. And then coming down. So this note here, again, it's the 6th that we're bending up to the flat 7. And just a little fingering tip if you want to get this smooth. Here I'm switching fingers, so I'm on my 3rd finger. 1st finger. Here I'm squeezing onto my 3rd finger and 2nd finger, and this frees up my 1st finger to play the next bend. Just a really smooth way to play that particular phrase. If you don't do that, you've got that awkward hop to do with your 1st finger from the E over to the B. It's harder to make that smooth, so I really recommend switching fingers in the middle of this phrase. Makes the whole thing nice and smooth. Next we've got this. And again, this is embellishing the A chord tones here. We've got the root, flat 3rd to major 3rd, and then descending it's root, 6th and 5th. And then the final phrase of the solo. And this phrase crops up several times in this track. It's a real trademark Cliff Gallup phrase. Once again, really just A triad or A arpeggio, just going straight up the A arpeggio. So root, 3rd, 5th, and then a high A root note, and then with that added sixth once again. 6, 5, third, ending on the fifth. And I should probably just say a quick word about the picking hand here. It's got a bit of a swing to it here. I think at a fast tempo the swing tends to smooth out a little bit and comes a bit closer to straight eighth notes, but I think Cliff Gallup is swinging it a little bit, and with that kind of feel I do tend to use alternate picking, going down on the beat and then up on the upbeat, or the swung upbeat. So all of that is played with alternate picking, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And by doing that you're really reinforcing the groove and bringing out that swing. Let me put all of that together for you slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4. The second solo kicks off like this. So again, mostly double stops on the top two strings, very similar to what we've had before. The difference here I think is we don't have this tritone shape. We've actually got the 8th fret on both the top two strings for this lick. So mostly double stops, sometimes it's single notes. I don't think you need to be super precise with that. Then we have this. So more double stops. We've got this 7/8/7 slide. Here I'm hearing it as a triple stop, so on the top 3 strings. And then just coming down. Then we've got more of the same kind of material. And then heading to the 5 chord. That's the same as what we've had before. And then again, very similar material to what we've had before. If you are super interested in learning this note for note, I will tab all of this out and that will be up on my Patreon page. Let me finish by talking about what he's doing in the verse of this track. And once again, very similar to what's going on in the solos. But the problem is when Gene Vincent is singing, the lead guitar is mixed pretty low. And some of the licks pop out and you can hear what he's doing, but other licks are completely buried. And you've got to use guesswork to really determine what's going on. So what I'm going to do is just play through a verse as best I can using some of this Cliff Gallup style material. Some of it will be note for note what I'm hearing on the recording, but I'm going to have to fill in some of the gaps and do my own thing in some spots, I think. So this is very similar to what's going on in verse 2, I think. I'm just going to play this through for you slowly. If you really want to learn it, you can replay the video, slow it down and figure out what I'm doing, or you can check out my tab. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Quick word on the gear that I'm using today, and as I said, I'm a rockabilly guitar player without a Gretsch, so a few sadder things in life than that, but I'm making do with my Telecaster, and I actually think that works quite well for this kind of style. The main thing that it's lacking is of course the Bigsby, which was quite a big part of the Cliff Gallup sound, and not really hearing much Bigsby action on this particular track, but I think he tended to just rest his little finger on the Bigsby, so occasionally you get some wobbles or variations in pitch, and I clearly can't do that with the Telecaster. The amp I'm using today is my Fender Deluxe, and of course you're going to need that rockabilly slapback delay sound, and for that I'm using the Catlin Bred Bell Epoch Deluxe. So this is the sound of the Tele going straight into the Deluxe. got that set on about 4, which is where I like to set the deluxe a lot of the time, and it's clean if you play softly, but if you dig in a bit harder then it starts to break up a little bit. And then if I turn on the delay pedal, just got that set for the single repeat, that quick rockabilly slap back. Right, that's about it for this video. I will tab all of this stuff out and put it up on my Patreon page. There'll be a PDF up there, and I also usually post the Guitar Pro file up there too. If you've got the Guitar Pro software, you can load it into that and you can play back the solos at different speeds. It can just be quite a useful practice tool. So check that out. If you're interested, you can pay what you like. Do check out the other Cliff Gallup stuff that's on my channel. As I say, I've done Race with the Devil and Bebop Lula. I've also done various other rockabilly things. I think if you do a search for rockabilly on my website or on my channel, you should find some other interesting things. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.